we have a lot of questions, and I'm keeping time in mind. I know we touched on diabetes. That was my question. How does diabetes affect? And we touched on insulin. And we also touched on thyroid. And so those are some of our questions. So let me get to some that we didn't touch on. And then if we have time, I'll come back to the ones about how thyroid affects. So the one that we didn't talk about yet is a question from the audience, which is, what are the tools to improve cognitive abilities post stroke?
Mm.
This
Yeah.
is very near and dear to me because my mother had a small stroke as well. So
Yes, some of the research on that shows that actually another question on this about one technology, but I'll just say in general, early rehabilitation that includes cognitive training from the very beginning is key. Like I found an article, research, it actually came out of China, and they said that they have 80% of their patients from stroke do not regain independent living, whereas in the US, 80% do. And I thought that was huge. And it mirrors what I saw 30 some years ago when I did neurology rotation at Stanford. It was like if somebody had a stroke, the neurologist comes by and it's almost like, well, I'm really sorry this happened. There's nothing we can do for you. But in the last 10 or 15 years, I've seen patients of mine and friends or who've had stroke, and they got tremendous amount of rehab, and they're walking around. You would not even know some of these people had strokes, and they were not able to walk. They could barely talk afterwards. So rehab is tremendous. The neuroplasticity of the brain and its ability, with a lot of work. It's a lot of work. They all described how many hours they would spend every day and how determined they had to be to recover. But, they did. It was very impressive.
Okay, that is very good to know. And is it time related? Just a follow-up question. Like, do you have to do it right away? Is that the most beneficial if you?
Probably, yeah, early. They talk about early, but I don't think any time is too late. If we still have neuroplasticity, but I think in the early time, the faster you get started, the more, fast your results. I don't know about the studies on comparing starting on the first week versus a year later. Usually the neurological things is best to start within the year if possible, but earlier.
Right. This is a very interesting question. It's a little bit different from any topics we've covered. And it says, audience question, it says, I had COVID pneumonia and was in life support for 2 months and another month in rehab. I sometimes forget words, or I might think of words that mean the same, but it isn't the word I'm looking for. I'm taking supplements, but wondering what other advice I could seek. I thought this is very timely because COVID, in the large scheme of things, COVID just happened. And so anybody who got COVID and has memory issues, I think that might be the cutting edge work that is still going on. But I wonder if you can ponder on this question.
Well, there are some things that have been found to help. They're still investigating this, and they're finding that, yes, inflammation and sort of maybe a dysregulated immune response to that, whether it's the virus at the time or somehow it's persisting even though the virus is gone. Now, recently, they just published that they've found evidence of spike protein that can be remaining as a residue in the brain that could be as highly immunogenic. So they're finding that the inflammation in long COVID, those kinds of symptoms can be very similar to chronic fatigue syndrome and chemotherapy brain, so to speak, and they feel it has to do a lot with inflammation. So I suppose everything anti-inflammatory can help. Methodology to increase the blood flow to the brain and to the heart, And it involves just simple thing. The person goes and lies on a table and they inflate like blood pressure cuffs, like on the legs all the way up to the hips. And it causes the blood flow. It lowers the resistance when the heart is pumping forward, and it helps to prevent the excessive backflow that can happen during diastolic. So it enhances blood flow, and that seems to be helping. It was helpful for post-COVID syndrome, and it also can be helpful post-stroke. So that was another thing. Both of those, they seem to be quite decent clinical studies on that. So I think that's a wonderful kind of non-invasive way to increase blood flow. I mean, there is hyperbaric oxygen that's been touted for quite a long time as being potentially helpful after stroke, and also perhaps could help with, I don't know if any studies on post-COVID brain fog, but it does have potentially some side effects, and it's expensive and not always so easy to get, not so accessible. And Medicare doesn't pay for it. I don't know if they pay for this technique or not, but there are things, and they're really working on it. There's research going on to see what will help. But certainly good anti-inflammatory diet and exercise and sleep, and giving your brain rest, and trying not to freak out when that happens, because the anxiety of or upset that you can't find it, that directly immediately impacts the hippocampal function. So I've had a lot of patients who are recovering from maybe TBI, traumatic brain injury, even just badly hitting their head, and they may go through a period of a year or 2 or 3 as things are gradually getting better. It can be a slow process, but most of those people have said, look, I've just learned to relax when I can't remember something, because then it comes more quickly. I just relax and then let it come.
Okay. Well, my third question, I think I'm only allowed to ask 4, Dr. Nancy. So I'm taking all the audience questions because I know they're very interested. And if you could set this up by just telling us a little, assuming everybody knows what a keto diet is, but if you could just briefly tell us what is a keto diet, and also can it prevent dementia?
Yes. Keto diet, in short, is the background is our brain and body has the ability to either burn glucose as fuel or byproducts of fat, small, called ketone bodies. It's like a hybrid car. It can run on gas, which is oxidative and actually kind of dirty and maybe pollutes, or it can run on electricity. And the ketones are like electricity to the brain. I mean, they are cleaner burning fuel. They don't create the same kind of oxidative stress. So it turns out that it is quite a healing type of diet in order to get your body switched to keto burning. One has to fast certain number of hours, and then one has to restrict carbohydrates, total carbohydrates in a day, usually to less than 50, sometimes even less than that. But the interesting thing is, I'll just speak to people who already have some degree of dementia, mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, is that the research so far seems to indicate that following the diet plus taking a supplement of ketones, like that has the biggest or the most reliable benefit. And so there are kind of protocols on how you can take ketones in between your meals, or maybe like coconut oil even has rich in medium chain triglycerides, which promote and help the body and brain make more ketones. So that's the diet. Well, I wasn't able to find anything that said they had tested keto diet for prevention. There wasn't any data that I could find on prevention, but it has been useful in people who do have it. But maybe perhaps more useful in people who don't have the ApoE4, which is the genetic marker for it. That was just a finding in one study. I think it would have to be research further, but.
Okay. And finally, the last question, I'll get back to the question on thyroid. So the question was really, if you're taking thyroid, if you have a thyroid issue, you're taking a supplement, like how do you prevent the deterioration of the brain health?
Well, basically, if you're taking your medication and you're keeping your thyroid levels in a good place, then you shouldn't have deterioration.
Okay.
And, and the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is coming from the brain. So if it's normal, it means the brain's pretty happy with that amount of thyroid hormone. So
Okay.
I don't think you have to have a long-term, and it's good that you visit your doctor once a year or every other year and get blood tests so that you don't go a long time with something undiagnosed that could potentially maybe injure the brain and maybe will reverse. Often the brain can recover, but maybe it won't. Just like B12 deficiency, also extremely important, especially for many of you who may be vegans, and even lacto-vegetarians and even non-vegetarians can get low in B12. It's quite more common than we thought, and even in younger ages. So ask your doctor to check your B12 level if you're not taking a supplement. And if you are taking a supplement, ask it anyway, because maybe you're taking too much. There's no need to have it in the many thousands. But if you're not taking it, you should have it checked. But don't take a tablet before you go to your blood test, because it'll artificially bring it up right away. You won't know.
Okay.
But B12 is a huge factor in memory and cognitive problems in vegetarians, in my experience, because I've had mostly vegetarian patients of some sort. And it's especially even in younger people. Somebody asked, what are the causes in young adults, like those below 40? And I would say B12 is a big one. And even like iron deficiency that can reduce productivity and mental acuity and energy. Thyroid, if it's too low, can cause memory loss. Actually, I had a professor once who shared his medical story with me. And he said that he went to the doctor. I was in medical school. He said, I went to the doctor the other day because I was in a meeting and I forgot a word. And I looked at him like, what? You forgot a word? So big deal, like that could happen to me or so many personalities, even at age 10 or 20. But that was abnormal for him. And he said, I have low thyroid. So I'll never forget that story because I was shocked, but it was how it manifested for him. And hyperthyroid can also get underdiagnosed. It often will cause a sleep problem. People just think they have insomnia. So, and then sleep disorder, of course, disturbs memory and cognition. So be sure you're getting your thyroid checked, especially women, more prone to those kinds of conditions.
But the first question that we have from another registrant is, how's the modern environment that we're living in right now impacting our memory, especially with all the information that we're being bombarded with, on a daily basis from different sources, from other people, our family members, and mainly the internet. We're getting so much information on various topics. So how do you think that this information bombardment is impacting our memory?
It's interesting. I did do some research on that as well. And it's definitely creating fatigue, information fatigue and overload. And I don't know if it's really causing memory problems, but one of the highly cited causes is the interruptions and the multitasking and the distracting. So when one can eliminate those as best you can and really focus on one thing, they haven't really found that memory is deteriorated, but it's this kind of thing that prevents, us from learning as well or quickly and retaining perhaps what we were reading because we're getting interrupted. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And we have another question here that's more specific to the specific registrant, but the question is, so one of this session's registrant's father has dementia with Lewy bodies. And so the question is, can one take preventative steps now to reduce the likelihood of developing a similar condition?
Yeah, Lewy body dementia is not thought to be really hereditary, and most people do not end up, they usually, there's one person in the family, it's kind of not running in the family. So I don't think they have to be particularly concerned, although it does, what Lewy body, it involves much of the pathology that's there in the brain for Alzheimer's, as well as the buildup of synuclein clumps within the cells. That's the same protein that builds up one of the main ones in Parkinson's. So I think that the researchers today, they're trying to see, and Dr. Bredesen with his work is trying to see if this kind of protocol will work with patients with Lewy body disease, but they haven't had enough of them and studied them enough to see. So I think the main thing would be just to do all the healthy things for your brain. And, there is the question of heredity. I do want to mention, somebody had asked before, is there a way to see what your risk is of Alzheimer's? And there is a marker called ApoE4, which is not really a marker for Alzheimer's, but it does predict risk. And people with that allele, the 4 for the ApoE gene, they can more easily develop lipid accumulations in the brain and the cells, and they also may be more prone to inflammation of the brain. So, and other places, because they also get cardiovascular disease more easily. So I would say that the useful thing about that, and I was encouraged that it's good to know, not because you have to live in fear, oh no, this is coming to me. It's not, it's an epigenetic phenomenon, but it means that you have to do extra work and should know, so that you really are motivated to eat that right food and to put the sugar aside and to not have the French fries or the things that are going to increase inflammation, and to exercise and get enough sleep. But it can be empowering, because there are things that you can do to prevent. And there's a website called apoe4.info, and Julia Gregory, I think is her name, Julie Gregory. She actually recovered herself from starting to go down the Alzheimer's direction, and she has both copies. She's got the dual copy, which increases Alzheimer's risk by 12 times or more. It's like a 50% chance of getting Alzheimer's if you have both alleles, the 4 number. So she created a whole support group and resources online to share her experience and empower other people to have the same benefits she did from everything she did in her lifestyle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we can also include that link in the chat so people can access the website. But another question that we have related to the previous ones is, and I think you covered some of the preventative ways.
Excuse me, just I want to make sure I said it. ApoE4 with a 4.info.
Apo,
and then ApoE4.info.
Are there any caps in that, or is it all lowercase?
The E is capitalized.
Okay, so ApoE4.info. .info. Okay, awesome. So moving on to the next question, which is similar to the previous one and related to it. And I think you did cover some of the preventative ways, but what are the preventative ways to arrest cognitive decline? And is there a test to diagnose the probability of getting Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I think it's the ApoE4. It's kind of the genetic. It'll give you a genetic risk of getting it. On the other hand, if you have neither copy 4 and you have a terrible lifestyle, you may very well be heading down that road even more than somebody with 1 or 2 copies of the ApoE4. So in fact, people without E4, they're more likely to have the toxic form, which is a little more challenging to treat.
Okay. And then we have a more specific question, but how can dementia patients, who are 80 years and older, be helped in keeping their mind healthy and, ensuring that they don't have any cognitive or functional decline and ensuring improvement in brain health?
Well, ensure is a pretty challenging word because we don't know, but that employs everything that we know now that could help. I think it's never too late to have a healthy, whole food, plant-based, anti-inflammatory diet. Whether they go into a keto type diet or not, it's at 88, I probably wouldn't do something that extreme, especially if they're not particularly clear mentally. But social contact can be huge. And I've seen older individuals with Alzheimer's who were very sweet and very calm and not agitated, and that they were actually they were work for their family, but they were quite a joy as well. And they were usually meditating to keep their stress down. They enjoyed that, and doing things with them, and even just bringing out scrapbooks and sharing memories or letting them talk, and just the supportive listening. There was a very interesting finding on supportive listening is that was the one social interaction that was associated with cognitive resilience, which they defined as for a given amount of atrophy of the brain, those people had more than expected cognitive ability. So yeah, supportive listening can be huge, and not challenging them, just trying to keep the stress levels down in the interactions. Exercise can be of help to them too, and getting outside and sunlight. And then you can also do the protocol of blood testing, the cognoscopy, so to speak. I posted that list, thehealthybrainsolution.com, I believe. So you can download that and take it to your doctor and ask for them to do as many of those tests as, they will. They won't usually do them all, especially if you're at Kaiser, but it's possible that you can get quite a bit of it covered by your insurance. Yeah, it is the word "the" is in there.
Okay. What's the website link again?
Thehealthybrainsolution.com.
And then kind of moving into sort of different topic. And this was like a personal question that I had, and we also kind of discussed this in our call previously, but in the gut-brain axis, the gut microbiome, as we know, can influence the production of several important neurotransmitters in our body, like serotonin, dopamine, GABA, which all play a really vital role in regulating our mood and overall behavior and cognition. And you did go over, a few lifestyle changes at the end of your presentation, but, what other medical interventions can be made in conjunction with the infusion of Ayurvedic medical practices and also our modern medicine practices to bring back a positive balance of microbiota and prevent the onset of certain neurodegenerative diseases that we discussed, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, I think it's an open question still, and that it needs a lot of research, but in theory, there are certain bacteria that are whose lack is associated with increased risk of Parkinson's, for example. And perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps supplementing with those particular bacteria will be helpful.
Okay.
And, the problem is getting bacteria to really colonize and stay there if you're taking a probiotic and then prebiotic, and having a good prebiotic kind of diet with lots of legumes and things with different types of fiber and fruits and vegetables. Basically, we weren't born to need a lot of supplements, but, it's our modern lifestyle and the lack of nutrition in food today that may make that, and many antibiotic treatments that may make that necessary. But I think I always try first Ayurvedic things, or if they have a lot of GI symptoms like gas or bloating and such, I usually address it Ayurvedically, and I may check a microbiome kind of panel to just see if some of the major beneficial bacteria are absent, and start supplementing that as well.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So that's all the questions that I had as part of my section. So I think I'll hand it over to Iru now for the rest of the questions.
Thank you so much, Akshaya, for asking all the valuable questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Nancy, for so patiently and kindly helping all of us. We're so grateful. So I am now also going to be asking some questions that we received via email. And I'm also going to ask the questions that we are now receiving in our live chat. Let me first start with the email, the questions we received via email. The first question is, would you recommend external counter pulsation method to enhance blood flow to the brain?
Well, in the articles that I found with where they tested it on particular conditions, like they tested it on the long COVID conditions, symptoms, and post-stroke, the results were very good and really no significant side effects. So I would say definitely, but I don't think it's something, it shouldn't be one's first line of like, oh, I want to improve blood flow to my brain, let me go do that. I mean, if you're a healthy person, you don't need to go do that. But there are things, besides just exercise alone increases blood flow. And even meditation, like transcendental meditation, cerebral blood flow to the frontal and the occipital cortex both are increased during the practice. So I think, probably there are a lot of things that should be doing anyway that are going to help. And that's a procedure you'd have to go, and it probably takes at least an hour or so, and go 20, 30 times. If you're not well, it's worth it and probably expensive. But if not, then just increase your blood pressure, your brain perfusion some other way. But I was fascinated to hear about it. I was very glad somebody asked about that.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you also, touched upon transcendental meditation, because that was also one of our questions. I'll
mention a couple other things. I mean, there's research on transcendental meditation that it's correlated with, lower oxidative stress, better metabolic, less metabolic syndrome, probably because less cortisol. People practicing TM, just starting college students, they compare with a control, and 3 months later that cortisol is in a more optimal range. So cortisol is a huge influence, stress, especially, that's one of the mediators of stress physiologically, is that hormone is directly toxic to the hippocampus in excess. And it can set up a vicious cycle. The hippocampus actually helps turn the stress response off. And if the hippocampus gets damaged, then one can be cycling in kind of a constant stress mode. So it's really important to, when the younger you are, to incorporate habits that reduce the impact of stress on the body, because it's cumulative.
I completely agree. And I have some personal experiences to validate that as well. Thank you so much. This is also a question via email, and there were some interests online on the live chat as well about Ayurvedic herbs and prescriptions, generally speaking, to maintain healthy memory and to prevent memory loss.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think, we all want a magic pill, and I'm not against herbs. I love herbs, and I take them as much as I can. I do feel that they're very beneficial. And some of the kind of superstars for brain health, supporting memory, learning, and for their antioxidant effects, even anti-amyloid effects in animal studies, are ashwagandha, which also has been shown to calm the nervous system. So it's also antioxidant. It helps to calm the immune system. So it helps fight excessive inflammation. So I would say that would be a really good one. There's some evidence that it may increase or support acetylcholine as well. And that's that neurotransmitter having to do with memory. And the drugs that they give for Alzheimer's, most of them are anticholinesterases. So they block the degradation of acetylcholine to try to increase them in the brain and in the synapses. But as I said, it only works well for a limited time. It also some evidence that it helps neurite formation, like connections to go out from the neurons to sprout new axons and or dendrites and such. So that's one of the things. Turmeric, fantastic. There's 4.4 times less Alzheimer's in Southeast Asians, especially in villagers who haven't adopted like a McDonald's lifestyle. So they're eating, home cooked food with lots of turmeric. And it's a very powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, and seems to have a direct effect to reduce the formation of amyloid plaque, which is coming from immune response, over response of the immune system. So Bacopa also is another one, Brahmi. Brahmi is a generic term. Sometimes it's used for Gotucola, Centella asiatica, as well as Bacopa monnieri. But Bacopa monnieri is according to the my Vijay mentors say, that's the real Brahmi. And Bacopa has been shown to also increase memory and support learning and cognition, and to reduce the degeneration of acetylcholine and production in the brain. It reduces free radicals. So there's a lot of overlap here, but Bacopa, I think if you were to take just 2 herbs, Bacopa, or 3, Bacopa, turmeric, ashwagandha, are 3 of the best. And Gotucola for focus. Good research on that as well. Besides, it helps collagen, so every woman should be taking it anyway, right?
Just to follow up, so the ashwagandha and the Brahmi that you talked about, so is that something that anybody can take without consulting, and just follow the prescription on the bottle, or?
Well, generally, if somebody's healthy and doesn't take medication and isn't known to have any health problems, yes. But if you're taking a medication, particularly maybe for the heart or blood pressure or arrhythmias or anything blood thinning, you should definitely talk to your doctor before you add an herb. And they, in all good conscience, they should look up that herb and see if it influences the degradation or the metabolism of the drug that the person's taking, or may have an action that's not so good. Like they're on a blood thinner, you don't want to take herbs with strong blood thinning effects.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much. And this question is my question. And from my own personal experiences, I realized that the mindset, our attitude, our emotions, they play a huge role. And if you could, elaborate on that, because our limited belief systems, they hold us back. So how can integrative medicine practices, including Ayurveda, help us identify and overcome these mental roadblocks? And what impact can they have on our cognitive function and memory? Thank you.
Yes, I think to the degree that they create stress, chronic anxiety, excess fear, trouble making the decisions. Excess fear, anxiety is associated generally with more cortisol. So, and often can disturb our sleep if one's worrying a lot and waking up and such. So it's a really great question. I think we all have to address that in our lives from time to time, and some people, more than others. But there's a term in Ayurveda, I think I'm going to refer to that first. It's called pragya aprad, and it means, it's been translated as mistake of the intellect or mistaken intellect. And I've been involved in coaching healthcare workers in a Department of Defense study the last couple of years, and I have somebody I coach with, and basically coaching, in my opinion, is very compatible with this Ayurvedic understanding of mistake of the intellect, because what we find is that there are these patterns that often we don't see. So we have to learn how to question ourselves. And if it's a really stuck issue, then having somebody who can ask you the hard questions, or the questions we would never think to ask ourselves. So inquiry is a really important thing. And I was asked to, when we talked the other night, to give some, maybe some steps or some things that somebody could do themselves. So I would just say that one thing that we taught our healthcare workers in some of the group sessions that we had were some basic ways of processing when they were found an issue that they were dealing with that was upsetting, for example. First of all is just to name the emotion. When we actually have to reflect and say, yeah, what is the emotion? What am I feeling? The brain immediately, you can see it on fMRI, it dramatically changes. The amygdala, which is, having to do with stress, anger, anxiety, that activity calms down right away. And there's activity in the right frontal cortex, which increases. So there's a shift to the cortex, which is the CEO of the brain. It gets us somehow, it really right away dampens down the emotional stress just by identifying it, saying, well, humiliation, or I felt threatened, or I felt anger. It's anger, And then one can ask, well, what about it, makes you angry? Well, if you're just telling a story to somebody, they're going to say, well, yeah, I'd feel the same way. You're talking to your friend. They say, yeah, I can't believe your boss said that. Oh, that's so wrong, right? Even therapists do that a lot. They just empower that, but it doesn't really get us out of it. But what gets us out of it is breaking this pragya through inquiring, what exactly about it made you angry, makes you angry? And having to stop and think about it, instead of, we call it inquiry into the obvious. It actually also just kind of opens up some of the awareness, and it dissipate, this emotional stress will dissipate. So that's another one. And also well, what meaning am I giving it that I get angry? Well, that he doesn't respect me, that I'm not appreciated. He doesn't appreciate what I do, or maybe I'm going to get fired, So just articulating and distinguishing what is going on these levels. Another thing can be, what am I saying about myself in regard to that? Well, if I say, well, he doesn't respect me, that's what the meaning I'm giving it is, my boss doesn't respect me. Well, the fear behind it is really that I'm not respectable. So what I'm saying to myself is, I'm not respectable. And one starts to see how one's giving one's assessment of oneself to what the other person is saying or how they behave. And it begins to kind of open up the mind to new ways of looking at it. It's a process. It doesn't even happen in an hour usually. I mean, things can, a certain degree, it can happen within a few minutes where one feels a lot more relieved. And then if one has a deep or really stuck problem and something, it can take hours. We just coach over time, and gradually all these things become dissipated. So it's really an ability that our mind has when it's just like meditation. We never think to transcend, that's the ultimate dissipation of pragya, because we go beyond the intellect and we just experience that inner peace. And that's beautiful. But if we come out and we're still upset about the boss, then we kind of recreate that whole physiology of stress again, right? So we have to kind of do both things. We dissipate it and the physiology gets us deep rest and healing. But when we come out, we also have to kind of get rid of whatever the assumptions and the paradigms and the ways we're looking at it in the background of our mind that are actually, damaging us and causing the emotions. So it's very fascinating. I found it to be a missing link from my practice in the first maybe 20 years, in the last 12 years or so. It's been very helpful.
Jayashree would like to know, how can we find out the inflammation number? What test do we ask our doctor? And what can we get done to check the BHRT? And does cholesterol medicine affect the cholergenic medicine that you talked about?
That's a really good question. For the hormones, you can just have your doctor basically test estradiol. Estradiol is the most potent estrogen. There are 3 different types that we have, and it seems to be the most important for brain. It's a growth factor and support for the brain. So serum estradiol, I mean, if it comes back and it's less than 5, I'd say that's a real danger zone. That's like you basically don't have any. Say this, we're talking about a postmenopausal woman. And that's going to lead to, starvation of the tissues to some degree from not having any. Because there are women after menopause who can have, I've seen as high as 29. There's a big difference between nothing and 29. Even 10 may be protective. And actually, I saw research one time that if it's 5, at least 5, then it has some bone protective effects as well. So probably, even a little bit can be helpful. I don't get my patients up into high ranges at all. There's all sorts of, you got to be careful. Don't go to clinics where they do these pellets. You get hundreds. Your estradiol goes to the hundreds, testosterone goes to the hundreds. It's very non-physiological, and I'm sure it's really not good for you. But, you want to do it intelligently and have it followed and match it to what a person's, experience is, what's getting better, what hasn't helped.
Thank you so much. I'll just ask one last question and then invite the panelists for a closure. And since we're talking about the test, what would be the best test for detecting early onset of Alzheimer's?
There is a genetic test. There is a very rare form that gives early Alzheimer's that's inherited, but it's very rare. So I would just mostly encourage the people that if you think, oh no, you're young and you think, oh, am I getting Alzheimer's? No, look to all these other lifestyle factors. It's very rare, and you would know it. It runs in your family and it runs young and all that. So I'd say, look to these other factors.